Good afternoon or good morning, depending on what class you are. This is a quick little video just to show you that uh, a cutting thing for the paper when you paper mache. It's just so it lays flat. You should cut it this way. But before that, you saw me put my brush in water. That's what you should do. When you're paper macheing, you don't want the brush to dry with that glue mixture in it because it will ruin the brush. So take a look here. After a couple of times of trial and error, if you're just going to use regular paper, then cut it like this. Cut all the corners and then a little cut in between the corners. That way when you go to apply it, it lays down smoothly without any of the edges sticking up. But there's another way that I prefer to do it, again through experience, because we're really paper macheing not for strength, but for the ability that it gives us to paint the objects. If you paint on the tape, the paint doesn't really adhere very well. When you apply your paper mache, whether you do it with the regular paper or tissue, just brush some of the mixture onto whatever it is you're trying to paper mache first. Put your paper on top and then brush it again. It may be a little bit slippery, like it might be hard to make sure that the paper is fixed, but you'll get it eventually. You could also use toilet paper. Once the paper mache mixture soaks into the toilet paper or the tissue, it hardens pretty well and it gives you a very nice, painting surface. It does provide some texture, which in some instances would be beneficial. Like for these plants, it's perfect because it provides like that little wrinkly texture that sometimes plants have. If you don't want that texture, there are some things you can do. You can apply multiple layers of paper mache and then sand it, which I have done before. But either way, I think that ultimately working with the tissue, which you're going to see now in a moment, is it's a faster way. It does take about a day or so for your paper mache mix to dry. So if you're doing this today, don't expect to be ready to paint today. You have to let it sit and be ready to paint next class. Here we go. So just get yourself a little tissue. Normally you want to brush the paper mache mix right on the object, but since that first round that I put with the regular paper, it hadn't dried yet, I just figured it'd be okay. But yeah, normally you do want to apply. You have to be very gentle with this, just kind of let the paper mache mix soak into the tissue. It is very delicate and it can rip very easily. It's kind of like gold leaf in the sense that you don't want to deal with it with your hands because it will start to rip, at least if it's wet, and it does make mush. Like you could scrunch it up. It's good for building forms, and it dries very strong once it dries if you're trying to build a form. I used it for the lion project and it ended up working really well. You could tighten the paper like you see me doing, like I'm pulling it, tightening it a bit to reduce the wrinkliness, if that's even a word. But ultimately you may have to just get your scissors and cut it in certain places so you don't get that super wrinkly part. So right at the beginning of this video, you saw me get some of the mix and put it into a red cup. You could use any container. I'll try to have some type of container for you in class. Your brush could just sit in there if you're going to the restroom or anything like that. Don't leave your brush outside of that mix because, again, you don't want it to dry in the brush. You don't want the paper mache mix to dry in the brush. Then it won't be usable. You just saw me cut a little bit there. That's just so it folds nicely. If I hadn't done that, then you'd have that big wrinkly spot come up there. Yeah, be careful with your clothes. Be careful you're not getting too much paper mache mix into your brush. It is very liquidy, but if it does fall on your clothes, you might have a hard spot on your clothes wherever it fell. It's glue, so it doesn't really stain, but it does, it does have an effect. This is the way I like to do it with the tissue. I think it works well. Some students haven't been paper macheing the base. You should, because it helps cover up the seams, like the seam where you united it, and it helps cover up the edge of the cardboard, because the edge of the cardboard has those openings, and you want those covered up for a more aesthetic feel once it's all said and done. This does take some time, but it shouldn't take you too much time with the tissue. With the regular paper, it does take quite a long time. But the tissue is big enough that it allows you to cover large areas, at least for the things that we're going to do in class. It does have less strength, but again, we're not paper macheing for strength. Like when you paper mache a balloon, certainly you want it to be strong so it holds its form. So when the balloon deflates, it doesn't, the paper mache doesn't deflate with the balloon. But that's not what we're doing here. We're just giving ourselves a painting surface. A good painting surface. Because of course you could paint on the tape, but it's not as good as painting on the paper mache tissue or regular paper. Some areas you can't paper mache. You can't really get inside the mouth. So for inside the mouth, I just coated it with a layer of the paper mache mix. And in my experience, that has worked pretty well. Like, you also can't paper mache the teeth. They're too small, but they don't have enough detail to, you could paint them white anyways, so you don't have to concern yourself too much with that. What you're trying to do too is you're trying to eliminate some of the textures that the tape has. And of course, if you use spray paint adheres to everything apparently. So I think I will use some spray paint just to spray paint the inside of the mouth of this thing. But this is a separate project since this plant is a little bit different than the piranha plant. So I'm just using this part of this project to show you about the paper mache stuff. Yeah, and we wouldn't be able to spray paint in class anyways, too many fumes. So remember, when you get your paper mache mix, keep your brush inside the mix so it doesn't dry out. I prefer if you use tissue, bring it yourself if you can. Toilet tissue, toilet paper serves the same purpose. Here it is all done, and now it's time to clean up. All right, one of the most important things of this project is making sure we clean up appropriately. When you leave your brush, just leave it in the water that I have in the room. There's a cup somewhere, usually in the front of the room, that has water. Put your glue or your leftover glue back into the bottle so we could use it again in the future. You could put it in just like that, or you could use a funnel if I happen to have one in class. Just makes it a little bit easier, right? Also, you could see that I did finish covering this is not a piranha plant, this is a Little Shop of Horrors plant in the mix. I'm not done with it, so there's still things I gotta add. But as I add things, I will paper mache those things as well. The inside of the mouth, like I said, is coated with just regular glue. All right, guys, that's it for this video. Have a great one.